some of you know that I helped to start a program called the Zen Hospice Project in San Francisco many years ago now. And we didn't have much of a plan for it. We just thought there was a natural match between people who were cultivating what we might call the listening mind through meditation practice, or the listening heart, and people who needed to be heard at least once in their life, folks who were dying. And we worked mostly with people living on the streets of San Francisco. And I'll tell you more about that as we go. But I retired from that some years ago now and started another organization called the Metta Institute. Metta is an old Buddhist word. It means loving kindness or friendliness. And because I couldn't think of a quality which was more necessary at the time of dying for the person in the bed or the person making the bed than loving kindness, than love. So that's the sort of background that I come to you from. But what I want to start by saying is, don't wait. Don't wait. Waiting is full of expectation. Waiting for the next moment to come, we miss this one. I can't tell you how many times I've been with folks, family members, people who are dying, who have said to me in one way or another, when is mom going to die? And waiting for that moment, they missed all the moments in between. So don't wait. That's my first counsel. I was at the bedside of one of our patients at the hospice, and I turned him on his side and I was washing his back, you know. And as I was washing his back, he turned to me and he said, I never thought it would be like this. And I said, what? And he said, dying. And I said, well, what did you think it would be like? And he said, I never thought about it. And you see, in that moment, that realization was a cause of greater suffering for him than his terminal lung cancer. He'd been caught by surprise by death, really. Death is the elephant in the room, right? It's the thing we all agree exists but refuse to talk about. You know, we project our worst fears onto it, we do our best to use euphemisms around it, or we try to avoid the subject altogether. Well, we can run, but we cannot hide. Yeah? There's a beautiful old story, an old Babylonian myth, some of you may know it, about this merchant who sends his servant to the marketplace to get the supplies for the house. And while the servant's in the marketplace, he's moving through the crowds, and a woman bumps into him. And he turns, and he recognizes that she's deaf. And so he gets really terrified, and he runs back home, and he tells the merchant, he said, you know, I was in the marketplace, this thing happened, I bumped into this woman, I recognized her as deaf. She said, and she gave me this terrifying look, this really threatening look. And she said, so please lend me your horse, so I can ride away from here today and escape my fate. I will ride to Samara, and there, death will not find me. Yeah? So the merchant says, sure, of course, take my horse. And the guy rides off in a fury. Then later, the merchant himself, he goes to the market. There, he runs into death. And he said, hey, how come you scared my servant like that? That was a terrible thing to do. Why'd you do that? And Death says, oh, that wasn't a threatening gesture. That was just a look of surprise. I was astonished to see him here in Baghdad when I knew that tonight I had an appointment with him in Samara. We can run, but we cannot hide. Yeah? So over the past 30 years or so, I've spent a lot of time sitting bedside with people who are dying, probably a couple of thousand of them, actually. And some of them died full of disappointment. They turned toward the wall in withdrawal and depression, and they never came back again. And some of them blossomed and found kindness and forgiveness and love that they've been looking for their whole lives. Both of them were my teachers, yeah? Both of them were my teachers. What seemed to really make the difference was the willingness to live into what it means to be human, into the deeper dimensions of what it means to be human. So today, I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. I don't have the 7 steps to an easy death. But what I'd like to do is kind of invite us to sit down with Death and have a cup of tea with her and get to know her really well and see how she might help us understand how to live a more meaningful, purposeful, perhaps loving and wise life. I think we can learn a lot of things about living fully from getting comfortable with death. Now, for me, Death is the kind of secret teacher hiding in plain sight. You know, we think about death as something that will happen at the end of a long road, you know. But death is with us all the time, in the marrow of every passing moment, in this moment, yeah. And as a secret teacher, she can show us, in a way, what matters most. And the good news is we don't have to wait until the time of our dying to find out. Now, some of the folks I work with, they lived on the edges of society. They lived on the margins of society, and they didn't trust much. And if I was going to be of any value to them, I had to be real. And that meant that I had to do my homework. You know, if you say to someone who tells you that they're afraid, and you say, I understand, and you haven't done your homework, you don't know what happens to you when you're afraid, and they will yell bullshit. And they will know that you're just guessing. And they will sniff out your sentimentality and your insincerity. So some of the folks I worked with, they came from cultures that I didn't know, speaking languages that I couldn't understand. There was this wonderful man, I remember Nguyen, a Vietnamese man, and he was really scared of ghosts. He was so terrified of ghosts. And his roommate's name was Isaiah. And Isaiah was an African-American man, and he was very comforted by nightly visits from his dead mother. Yeah? And these guys were roommates. There was folks I worked with in their 20s who barely had started their lives. And Elizabeth, who at 93 said to me, why has death come for me so soon? Yeah. There was a man I worked with, he was a hemophiliac. And he worked in a foundry in East Bay. And a tough guy, you know, real hard-nosed guy. And he contracted the HIV virus from a blood transfusion. But what was really unusual about his situation was that 6 months before, when his son called him to tell him that he was gay and that he was now infected with HIV, the father hung up the phone. He wouldn't talk to him. Yeah. And now, father and son were in the same room, in twin beds, being cared for by Agnes, the son's mother, and the father's wife. Yeah. There was a guy, Alex, that I worked with, who got confused with some dementia, and he climbed out into his fire escape, and he froze to death one night. All these folks were my teachers, yeah? Now, in Zen, we have this expression that when your teacher's in the room, it keeps you honest, yeah? And so I brought my teachers with me, yeah? And so what I'd like to do in just a moment is I'm going to ask Van to put up some photos of them on the screens. And these are ordinary folks, folks like you and I, who have all died now. You know, people I looked after and cared for. These are my teachers. And so if they're here in the room, they really help me. They really support me a lot. And I think they might be of value to you. Now, as you watch these photos, I'd like to suggest that you watch them in a particular way. This is not my deck. This is not a video that we watch passively. These are real people who have something useful to share with you. And so in order to really benefit from that, I think what would be helpful is if you don't look at them in an ordinary way, that you don't look at them in the way you normally look at a screen, but instead you turn inward a little bit more and settle into your body, heart, and mind, and see, as you look at the slides, what's happening in your body? What are the real sensations that are going on there? And what are the honest feelings in your heart if you don't turn away from anything? And what goes on in your mind? You know, if you walked into your mind and looked at the activity there, what's happening in your mind as you're looking at these slides? And then 2 questions. What attracts you? And what causes you to pull away? What attracts you and what causes you to pull away? That's the 2 most important questions to answer. And that's about you, it's not about them. Yeah? Just a minute. So, yeah, let's put them up now, man. Let's put those slides up now. And we're just going to leave them up on a loop so that they just will move as I'm speaking to you. And so they're going to teach, and I'm going to translate. Okay? That's how it's going to work. So look and see what attracts you, what causes you to pull away. You know, the habits of our life, they have a very strong momentum. And that momentum carries through right into the time of our dying. So the question that arises, of course, is, well, what habits do we want to create? Yeah? I worked with a lot of people near the end of their life, and many of them died full of fear and distress. And I think we can do something about that. And I think the way we do something about that is by really looking at inviting in the wisdom of death to help us understand how to live this life with some degree of integrity. I mean, suppose we stop compartmentalizing death, cutting it off from life. I mean, imagine if we regarded death as the final stage of growth instead of a wasting away experience. I mean, could we then turn toward death and say, how then shall I live? I think without a reminder of death, we tend to take life for granted. We get caught up in our everyday preoccupations, you know. But when we keep death really close at hand, at our fingertips, I think we don't hold on so tightly. I think we let go a little bit more easily. I think we don't take ourselves or our ideas so seriously. And I think this engenders a certain kind of kindness for each other when we recognize that we're all in the boat together. But in this culture, we tend to treat death predominantly as a medical event, and we turn it over to medicine. And I want good medicine, you know. I want great pain control and symptom management when I'm dying, but dying is too big for the medical model alone. We need to bring the best of what medicine has to offer, but I'm not sure we should let it drive the bus. I think the experience of dying is so much more profound that it dwarfs all models, including most religious models. Dying is inevitable and intimate. Now, I said this, I was at a dinner party with a bunch of Silicon Valley folks a little while ago, and I said that dying is inevitable and intimate, and a guy raised his hand immediately. And he said, well, I don't know about inevitable. He said, we're working on that, you know. And I said, great, fantastic, thank you. But, you know, let's take death out of the sentence for a minute. Let's just talk about endings. How do you meet endings? Like the endings in your life, the end of a sentence, the end of a meal, the end of a relationship, the end of your day. How do you meet endings? And I don't have some kind of moral standard about how you're supposed to do that, but I do know that the way in which we meet endings, to a large part, shape the way the next thing begins. And so by looking at the way we meet endings, not only do we understand something about our day-to-day life, but I think it becomes the best preparation for dying. Regularly, I saw in the people that I was working with, and I changed diapers on park benches behind City Hall, these folks who had supposedly no inner life, you know, they regularly met the experience of dying, which they felt was unbearable and unimaginable to them. They regularly met it in extraordinary ways. Now, sometimes those turns happened in the final month of life or weeks of life, or sometimes even in the final moments of life. Now, we might say too late, and I would agree. It's too late to do that work at the end of your life. But here's the thing. If that opportunity is available to us then, it's available to us now. And we don't need to wait until that time. In fact, to imagine that at the time of our death, we will have the physical strength, the emotional stability, the mental clarity to do the work of a lifetime is a kind of ridiculous gamble, actually. It's not one I would advise. Rather, I think we can harness an awareness of death to help us appreciate the fact that we're alive, to encourage self-exploration, to help us clarify our values, to find meaning, to generate positive action in the world. What becomes really undeniable when you sit with people who are dying is that fragility and impermanence are woven into the very fabric of our existence. It's always coming together and falling apart, and not just at the time of our death. And it's possible to hold it all with love and compassion. In my experience, life's uncertainty actually gives me perspective. You know, as we come into contact with the precariousness of this life, it's absolutely precarious. Then we also come into contact with its preciousness. And then we don't want to waste a moment. Then we want to jump into our life with both feet. We want to tell the people we love that we love them. We want to use our life in a responsible way. So don't wait is a pathway, I think, to fulfillment and an antidote to regret. And embracing the truth that things inevitably will end encourages us not to wait in order to begin living. And instead of pinning our hopes on some future outcome, we focus more on the present and being fully engaged in our lives, just as they are. Mostly we imagine death will come later, right? Like when I'm old. Well, I'm old. This idea of later gives us this really comfortable little illusion. Yeah? Death will come later. It's not going to come now. But change, constant change, is not later. Constant change is now. It's happening right now. Impermanence is the essential truth woven into every aspect of our life. I mean, where is this morning's breakfast? Where is last night's lovemaking? Yeah. Could someone please tell me, where has my blonde hair gone? Yeah. We know, everybody knows, you know, that one day your mother's treasures vase is going to fall off the shelf and break. It's going to happen, right? That your car is going to break down, that, you know, someone we love will die. I think the challenge or the encouragement that I'm trying to offer is to move that understanding from our heads into our hearts. Impermanence isn't the cause of suffering. We actually rely on change. We count on it. I mean, you know, that cold you have today, it won't last forever, right? That really boring dinner party that you're going to go to on Saturday night, it will come to an end, you know? Evil dictatorships will fall. Great trees will fall and burn in our woods to make room for new ones. Presidential terms will come to an end. Yeah. You know, without impermanence, we couldn't lead our lives. Our son couldn't take his first steps. Our daughter couldn't grow up to be a scientist. You know, it's kind of funny to me. We pretty much all agree that everything changes, right? Seasons come and go, relationships come and go. We all agree, constant change. Everything is changing, we think, except me. I'm the one thing going through a solid thing going through a changing world, right? I mean, I have friends who come up to me and say, Frank, I haven't seen you in 20 years. You haven't changed a bit. And I'm really insulted, you know? Like, things are changing all the time. And we tend to think of ourselves as some fixed object going through life. But actually, we are that change. We are like everything else, at once here and disappearing. Yeah? I was just in Japan for some work and teaching there, and I happened to be there at the height of cherry blossoms. Yeah, the beautiful cherry blossoms blooming everywhere, sakura. They're just gorgeous. And I'm going tomorrow to Idaho, where I teach in northern Idaho, where these little tiny blue flax flowers that last for a single day. Yeah. Tell me, what's so beautiful? Why are those flowers, those fragile cherry blossoms, and those so delicate blue flax flowers, why are they so much more beautiful than plastic flowers? I mean, isn't it their brevity that is part of their beauty? I mean, isn't it the fact that we know that they'll come and go? Doesn't that invite us into wonder and to gratitude? Death is not a stranger. It's always with us. You know? This moment you're living now, it'll never come again. Never. And no matter how much you accomplish or how many times you do something, there'll come a time when you do it for the last time. You have this one opportunity to really fall in love with existence. Why not really enjoy it? Huh? I had a heart attack a few years ago. I was teaching a retreat for doctors and nurses on compassion. And in the course of that retreat, I had a heart attack. Actually, I didn't have a heart attack. I had heart pain, which I denied 3 times, actually. First time, I thought I had indigestion. I got some Tums. This is very common for people who have heart attacks. Second time, I was leading a guided meditation on sensing the body. Yeah? and all these strong sensations were moving through the body. And I thought, sensing, you know. The third time, I was in a video conference with Ram Dass, a friend of mine. He's an old, great old spiritual teacher. And I love him. He's a very dear friend of mine. I was just with him last week. And I was getting a little irritable with him, emotionally irritable. And this reminded me of my wife when she was giving birth to our son. She got a little emotionally irritable when I started suggesting things to her. Yeah. And it was that emotional irritability that really got my attention, more than the physical sensations. And I said to Ram Dass, I'm sorry, I have to go now. You keep going. And they took me to the hospital, and I had a heart attack in the ER. Yeah. I used to think I knew something about dying. And then I had a heart attack. And I realized I didn't know very much at all. And that was a good thing. So now I know a lot less. And that's much more helpful. Yeah. When I was recovering from the surgery, and it took a long time for me to recover, about 6 months, because they cut my phrenic nerve by mistake, which meant my diaphragm didn't work and my lung didn't work. And so I was recovering at home, and a very famous Tibetan teacher called me up, and I won't say who, but this particular teacher had trouble with his own heart. And so I thought, oh good, he's going to know what to do, right? I mean, what? So I got him he called me up, and I was on the phone with him, and I thought he's going to give me some esoteric practice or something. It's going to be good, right? And I said, how did you deal with it? You know, like all the depression, which is part of the experience, and the feeling of helplessness, and the sense of identity just being wiped out. Like, how did you deal with this, you know? And there was this long pause on the other end of the phone, and then he said, well, I think it's good to have a heart. And he said, if you have a heart, you should expect it will have problems. And then he told me to rest more, and he hung up. That was it. I thought, no esoteric practice? What? But afterwards I thought, you know, he's really right. If you have a heart, if you have a human body, you should expect it will have problems. I mean, who said it should be otherwise? Yeah. If you have a heart, if you have a human incarnation, a human life, you should expect it will have problems. You know, there's this phenomenon that happens with people who are diagnosed with long-term illnesses like cancer. A friend of mine calls it a secret gratitude. It's really an interesting phenomenon. It happens that people with cancer talk to each other, and they talk to me about it, but they don't publicize it so much. And what they're really talking about is after the initial shock of the diagnosis sort of settles, there's this feeling of quiet relief, actually. And the feeling is that they gain a kind of perspective, and they say things like, now I can say no. I can say no to that dinner party I don't want to go to. I can say no to going to work. I don't want to go to work anymore. Yeah? Whereas before, I always felt like I had to say yes to everything. Yeah? And they say, now I can finally rest. There was a woman that we looked after in our hospice. Her name was Adele. And she was this very fierce, 86-year-old Russian Jewish lady, like as tough as they come, really tough as nails, you know, my kind of gal. And the night she was dying, they called me up. And so I went in. I always went in when people were dying to be with them. And I walked in the room, and Adele was sitting on the edge of her bed, sort of with her feet dangling off the edge of the bed in her bedclothes. And I went and sat in the corner. That's my way. I sort of sit in the corner and see, is anything really needed before I jump in to help, you know? And there was a really nice, well-meaning attendant, nurse's assistant, sitting next to her. And this attendant turned to Adele and she said, Adele, honey, you don't have to be scared. We're all right here with you. And Adele turned to her and she said, honey, if this was happening to you, you'd be scared. Like that. Yeah. So I stayed in the corner. Yeah. And then a little while later, this very well-meaning attendant said to her, you look a little cold. Would you like a shawl or a blanket around your shoulders? And Adele said, of course I'm cold. I'm almost dead. I hope I have half of her tenacity when I'm dying. But sitting in a corner, I noticed a few things. One was that Adele wanted no nonsense. She didn't want to talk about tunnels of light or bardos or any of these things. She just wanted real, authentic relationship. And the second thing was that there was suffering, there was struggle. There's a struggle in dying, just like there's a struggle getting born. In her case, it was manifest in the breath. Every in-breath struggle, every out-breath struggle. And this despite the fact that we made all the right interventions of oxygen and morphine, etc. There's still a struggle. There's a labor to dying. Yeah. So I pulled my chair up really close to her, and I looked her directly in the eye, and I said, Adele, would you like to suffer a little less? Would you like to struggle a little less? And she said, yes. And I said, okay, I noticed something. I noticed that right there at the end of your exhale, just before the next inhale, there's this little gap, this little pause. And I wonder what it would be like if you could put your attention there just for a moment, you know. I'll do it with you. Now, this is a Russian Jewish lady, 86 years old. She doesn't care beans about meditation or Buddhism or mindfulness or any of these things, right? But she's highly motivated in this moment to be free of suffering. So she said, okay. And I said, all right, I'll do it with you. So as she would breathe in, I would breathe in. As she would breathe out, I would breathe out. Just that simple. No special guidance, no California woo-woo energy work or anything like this, you know? Just real. Just real. And I noticed that as we were doing this together, that she found that sort of pause, that gap between the exhale and the next inhale. That's a really interesting place for us. That's a place of fear or faith. Do you really trust the next breath will come? Yeah. And I noticed that as she found this place, the fear on her face, it just drained away, you know. And she had this kind of look of relaxation about her. And she said, I think I want to lie back on my pillow now. I said, great idea. Go ahead, you do that. And a little while later, she died very peacefully. Yeah. Do we have to die before we can rest in peace? You know? I think when we embrace impermanence, when we embrace constant change, a certain grace enters our life that allows us to treasure our experiences, to feel deeply, to do it all without clinging. And we're free to savor this life, the beauty and the horror of it, actually. Everything can impress itself on our soul, on our consciousness. And I think we can become more appreciative about life. You know, Abe Maslow, the great humanist psychologist, he said, he had a heart attack too. When I had a heart attack, by the way, I studied all the famous people that had heart attacks to see if I could learn something. Yeah. But Abe Maslow had the best thing. He said, death and its ever-present possibility makes love, passionate love, more possible. Yeah, I thought that was beautiful. I mean, you know the two most important questions that people ask me before they die? It's not, you know, when am I going to die or what's going to happen after I die? The two most important questions that people ask me are, am I loved? And did I love well? Am I loved? And did I love well? Everything else is extra. And if those are the most important questions then, why aren't they the most important questions now? All of our relationships will end in separation. The people we love will die. The question becomes, how do I want to care for them now? Don't wait. Don't wait. You know, to be human, for me at least, is much more than getting born and getting a good education and getting a great job at Google, you know, or a house on a nice street, you know, so that we can go to bed and sleep and wake up in the morning and do it all over again. I think it's an invitation to feel everything. I think it's to come into direct contact with this strange, beautiful, and sometimes perfectly ordinary thing that we call life. And I think it's an opportunity to be conscious of the fact that some of us will make love while others make war. To recognize the truth that there are babies like my granddaughter last night who was in our house making a, you know, tent out of bed sheets and couch pillows. And there are kids that are screaming in Syrian refugee camps. There are kids getting shot in our schools, and there are others that are speaking truth to power. There's devastation and hopelessness, and there's the passion and the holy commitment of creating a better future for everyone. Yeah. There's me speaking and you listening, and the sense of separation that might exist. And then there's the unity that starts to emerge as soon as we realize, or as soon as we start talking about love. Don't wait. Dying folks taught me that. Don't wait. Yeah. So I thought what we might do here is just maybe engage together in a bit of a dialogue. Maybe there's something about what I've said that you want to chat about, or maybe you don't agree with any of it. That's okay. But I thought, let's talk about this. And let's just talk in a real way about what actually matters. And so it's up for grabs. All questions or comments are welcome. And, you know, I'll vamp a little bit here and maybe share some more stories. We'll see what happens. So let me ask you a question. When you were looking at the photos, what attracted you and what caused you to pull away? Anybody willing to say? What attracted you and what caused you to pull away?
Just the smiles attracted.
The smiles attracted you. What caused you to pull away, even if only slightly? What maybe scared you or made you nervous or you didn't like?
I didn't have any.
You didn't have anything like that? Yeah. Okay. All right, good. Well, let's hear from some other people. I'm just really curious to know what happened there. You're wanting to say something? We'll get you a mic.
I pulled away from the cigarette.
From the cigarette, you saw people smoking. Did that happen for anybody else in the room? Yeah, you had the same experience. Several people did. Yeah. You know, we had a hospice at Laguna Honda Hospital, which is the nation's largest long-term care facility. We started there. We were given the basement and back of a hospital to start the hospice in. And in the old days, people could smoke in their beds in the hospital. But, you know, then that kind of got prohibited. And so we had to create a smoker's room. So we put up pictures of famous dead smokers in the smoker's room, of, you know, Humphrey Bogart and Marlene Dietrich and all kinds of movie stars. And all the Buddhists who were kind of closet smokers, you know, that they finally copped to it. And they would hang out there with the patients, yeah. Yeah. Well, maybe, you know, if we've had someone in our family who got sick, or like my mother died of emphysema, so I have some reactivity to cigarettes, yeah. Let's go back to this young woman.
I didn't have any problem with the cigarettes. It seemed to me like they were enjoying themselves.
Yeah, yeah. So not everybody does, but some people do. For some people, it's like, might as well enjoy it, right? But for others, if we've had something like that in our families or our friends, it can cause some reactivity for us. So that's one of the challenges of being with people who are dying. How do we see ourselves in them? Like when you looked at these photos, like I know these people. I could tell you all their backstory. I worked with all of them. But you don't know them, right? So what are you seeing, right? I mean, you know tarot cards? You know how tarot cards, you don't have to believe in tarot, but what tarot cards are archetypical images, you know, that are represented on the cards. And what these photos are kind of like tarot cards. The whole human condition is here. Depression, happiness, fatigue, fear, it's all here in these slides. Look at her. So when you look at them, I think what we're seeing is ourselves. I think that we're seeing our own hopes and fears. Yeah. Now, if we understand that, then it takes the conversation a little deeper. Yeah. So what'd you see? What'd you see?
I don't know which one is going to be me.
I don't know which one is going to be me, yeah. What did you see that attracted you or caused you to pull away?
It feels like you keep trying to give us things other than the grief that I always see in the ending. It's like, no matter what else we get out of it, whatever positives we find here, yeah, whatever chance there is to not have a cold anymore,
right,
it's still a horrendous loss.
Yes, Yeah, and let's not...
I don't want to sugarcoat that at all.
Absolutely, and I don't want to sugarcoat it either. I have no interest in that. My interest is in being deeply real with people. And there's no question that when we experience the loss of someone we love, we're going to feel grief. And that grief is going to show up in all kinds of ways. It's going to feel like sadness, and it's also going to show up as anger and as fear, and sometimes like numbness, or like you're walking through molasses, you know, and you can't find your way.
Yeah, and I think that the numb is more what led me away. It's like there's a lot to take in, and there's an approach retreat thing that I just have to do with it.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the experiences of grief, you know, first of all, there's a whole lot of nonsense out there about models of grief and, you know, timelines for how people should move through it, and it's just nonsense. Grief is a totally uncontrollable experience. And we usually enter that experience feeling very fragmented, you know. But if we stay attentive to that experience, one of the things we start to see is, oh my God, that's the underground river that's moving through all our lives, that we rarely talk about with each other. And so we begin to feel this fragmentation begins to become something more like connectedness, actually, more like wholeness. It doesn't start out that way, but it frequently develops into that kind of understanding.
Say just a couple more words. What's the fragmentation that develops into wholeness? How do things connect?
Well, in the beginning, we feel fragmented because we feel like our life has been shattered. All the ways that, you know, we counted on it being have been upset in one way or another. Yeah, Mom's going to be here. You know, the people I love are going to be here. That's even if we know otherwise, we believe that to be true. Often. And so part of what happens in grief is not just the loss of that person, but the loss of that particular dream or of that belief. Yeah? And when we can then turn toward that experience as opposed to turning away from it, always when we turn toward suffering, there we find the healing. The healing is always found in the middle of the suffering. Let me give you an example. I was sitting in my office one day, and the phone rang. And it was a dad. And the dad said, we understand that that you could help keep our son at home after he dies. And I said, yeah, I could do that. They wanted to stay with their son for a few days at home. And I said, yeah, I could do that. I said, you just call me when the time comes. He said, no, you don't understand, it's just happened. And I said, oh, okay, I'll be right over. And I drove to their house up in Sonoma County, and they were, I walked in the house. I didn't know this family. I never met them before. But and I walked into the room. There was mom and dad and a few of the neighbors and friends. And there was this 7-year-old boy in his bed, dead. And I went over to this little boy following my intuition, which I trust. And I leaned over and I kissed him on the forehead, just as a way of greeting him. And when I did this, the whole room broke into tears. Because while they had cared for him with great love, nobody had touched him since he died. That's the extent of our fear around dying. So this mom and this dad and I talked about this process of bathing the body that's been done in every culture, every religious tradition for millennia. And we talked about how they might do it differently. And they were great gardeners, so we went out to the garden and we got lemon geraniums and sage and rosemary and rose petals. You know, we made a basin of water of all these sweet herbs and flowers. And we got washcloths and towels. And then this mom and this dad started this process of bathing their son. I remember they started at the top of his head and they bathed down his back. And as they bathed down his back, his mom would stop at these little nicks and scratches, you know, and take care of them with so much love. And sometimes they would have to stop and tell me a story about him as a way of getting current with the truth of what was in front of them. Sometimes it was too hard for the dad, and he had to go stand by the window, you know, and look out to the garden. He couldn't do it. And this mom, I remember she got to his toes, and she counted his toes. She said she'd done that when he was born. Yeah. Are any of you parents in the room? Yeah, okay. I mean, this is impossible. This is an impossible situation. And there are no words that you can touch this kind of suffering. What you can do is bear witness to the suffering. and stay in the room when the going gets rough. So I said to her, just keep going. And she looked at me with these beseeching eyes like, am I going to survive this? Can any mother survive this? And my job was to hand her another washcloth and orient her back to the suffering. She kept bathing this boy, and by the time she got to his face, it was so intimate between this mom and this 7-year-old boy, really intimate. And she'd burned through a kind of grief. And I don't mean her grief was over, not by the long shot, it was just beginning, but the feeling of separation, which is part of the experience of grief, at that moment had melted. And this mom and this boy were like one thing. Maybe like the moment in which, you know, the women in this room can tell you what it's like when you birth a child and you feel like you're one being. No separation. Or when you're breastfeeding and you feel yourself to be one being. The child knows himself to be that too. I remember that we dressed him in his Mickey Mouse pajamas. And we invited his brothers and sisters in the room. And I asked him what he liked to do the most, and he said he liked to make model airplanes. So we got those model airplanes and we made a mobile out of them so that brothers and sisters could be part of this. And we hung the mobile over his bed, you know. And I hung out with his younger brothers and sisters. I came home that night, and my own son was 7 years old at the time. And I can tell you, I held him really close. Yeah. So no, I'm not interested in Pollyanna. I'm not interested in skipping over anything, but I am interested in changing the dialogue that we have around death only being failure and only being a wasting away experience. It's not my experience. It's my experience that people frequently, in the middle of that, find resources that they never knew they had and discover unbelievable capacity, actually. It doesn't happen every time, but most of the stories we tell ourselves about dying are scary stories. And I think that that doesn't help us. And that we need to see. Some of us have been in the room with people who have died, and it's been hard. And others have been in the room, and it's been unbelievably beautiful. Both are true. Both are true.
Thank you. From the pictures, I see mostly dying folks were fearful and painful. But I do see a few happy faces.
I'll see.
And I think dying, if viewed from an eternal point of view, can be viewed as a happy occasion, because I remember there's a song like it's basically says I forgot the title. It's through an open door, all the burdens are laid aside, all the work done. My mother is there waiting for me. My father is there too. Lots of friends are waiting for me. Very happy, you know, happy is it, right? I think if we have a faith that we in heaven we have an eternal life, then our earthly life is very short. It could be 70 years or 80 years. As Moses said 3,000 years ago. The length of like 70 years is only very short. The span of our life is so quick, they fly away, and we are gone.
Yes.
We all fly away. And our life is like a flower of a field. The wind blows over it. It's gone. Even its place remembers it no more. But for those people who have faith, I think the Creator's eternal love is on those. Their righteousness is on their children's children. I found this kind of hope and the eternal faith gives a lot of comfort.
So that's something you have confidence in and you have real faith in. Beautiful. Beautiful for you.
Right. I lost 2 sisters when I was a little kid. It was a very traumatic experience. But then I came, my mom is 85 years old and she's really, you know, on that stage. But now I have a lot of peace because, you know, this is going to happen to everybody.
Yes.
No?
It is. And so, you know, awareness, in a way, because some of you are mindfulness students, we could say awareness is totally undivided. And yet, it can include division. It can include paradox. So I think that one of the things that's often true about the dying process is that it's hard. That it's maybe the toughest work we'll ever do in our lives. And being with someone we love, also really difficult, yeah? But it isn't all that it is. It isn't all that it is, yeah? So And if we don't start including some other elements of that conversation, we will lean into, our default position will always be it's miserable and it's failure, and that's what we've been taught for generations now. And I want to shift that dialogue. Now, for some people like yourself, who are people of great faith, they have a sense of eternity and that there's a life after death. Others don't have that belief, and they still have graceful deaths. Yeah, it's not a prerequisite for a fearless death. Yeah? In fact, I often ask people when they're dying, what do you think is going to happen after you die? It's a really good question to ask all of us. And you know, I don't know, actually. I don't really know. I mean, when I find out, I'll write, okay? But what you think about it matters. So, for example, there was a woman we were working with. She was a Christian Scientist, and she had deep faith, maybe like yourself, deep faith. And she said to me, I just want to put my head in the lap of Jesus. And I said, okay, sounds good. And then her daughter came, granddaughter rather, came to visit her. And her granddaughter said, Grandma, I was reading a book. And in this book, it says that after you die, everybody who's died before you will be there to meet you, so you don't have to be worried about anything, Grandma. And Grandma became terrified. Yeah. You know why? She confided in me that Edgar, her husband, had been beating her most of her life. And the idea of spending eternity with Edgar was terrifying to her. So I don't impose my idea, even those that I have faith in, I don't impose those on others, but rather I try and discover from the other person, what is it that really is truthful to you? So there was a guy, Jackie, in the hospice, African-American man, 30-year heroin user. Yeah? And he's at the Zen Hospice Project. And I said, Jackie, here you are at the Zen Hospice. You think you're going to get born again? He said, yep. I said, well, what are you going to come back as? He said, Jackie. I said, what do you want to be Jackie for? You could be a king or a queen or, you know, the head of Google, you know. And I said, you know, in some cultures you could be a cow, and that would be very sacred, you know. And he said, I'm not coming back as no goddamn cow. And I said, well, why do you want to be Jackie? He said, because next time I'm going to get it right. And you see, we're in a really different conversation now. You know, we're really in a conversation about his current life. Yeah. So I don't impose my ideas on anybody. I'm really curious. I like to discover with people. I walk in the room with a sense of wonder, you know. There was a guy who was the head of the California Atheist Association who came to die with us at Zen Hospice. I was very proud of that he didn't feel like anybody was going to push any dogma on him, you know. And so I sat down with him, and we talked a lot about this question. And I said, what's going to happen after you die? He said, nothing. I said, what do you mean, nothing? He said, nothing. And I said, you mean like, I said, you know, will you smell things? Will you hear things? No, you don't smell things. You don't have a nose. You don't hear things. You don't have ears. I said, well, what's it like? There's nothing. Is it like a dial tone, you know? And he said, no. He said, it's just, you become molecules, and those molecules mix with all the other molecules in the universe. And you just become one with all the other molecules. I said, oh, that kind of nothing. Oh, okay. So I don't have some idea about how it's supposed to go. But I do think that the way in which we think about what happens after we die matters, shapes the way in which we die, and to some extent the way in which we live our lives, I think. So I think that your question, your comments are good ones. But we'll find out, right? And we'll find out. What else is on your hearts and minds? Anything else? Yeah, please. Over there.
I really enjoyed your podcast with Sam Harris, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, he's a great guy, you know. He's a bit of a provocateur, Sam, you know. Yeah. And he was going to nail me on my Buddhist stuff, I think, but I didn't bite. He's a really good guy. He's a great interview. And he told me that it's one of the most popular podcasts he's ever had. Yeah. Yeah.
So I had a question about sort of Eastern philosophy. So one of the pillars or foundation of Eastern philosophy is the sense of self that we have is an illusion, and one of the foundations of all suffering. So I kind of wanted to ask you how we can bring awareness of death in trying to understand that illusion.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, so first of all, we got to distinguish between Eastern philosophy because it's too big a generalization, right? Because what a Hindu belief is and what a Buddhist belief is can be quite different. And also within Buddhist schools, there are many, many distinctions and differences. Some Buddhist schools don't ascribe to any notion of rebirth, for example. So one way in Buddhist schools, at least in the early Theravadan schools, is they think of us as what are called a heap, or the 5 heaps. We're a collection of things, you know, of seeing, of tasting, of touching, of smelling, you know, these senses. And the 6th being consciousness, the ability to know the experience. And that, in fact, in that system, that's what we are. We are this collection of things which is constantly appearing and disappearing, constantly changing. So when I said earlier, we think of ourselves as a solid thing going through a changing world, this is a kind of an illusion. Yeah? And yet there's also some imprint, we could say, that seems to continue and has some kind of momentum to it. Yeah? This is also true. And now in different cultures, in some of the Vedanta cultures, we would call that Atman, you know, the sense of soul. If in the Buddhist cultures, we speak about a consciousness that can continue, actually, and has a momentum to it that inclines it toward rebirth. Yeah. I think that really we don't have to believe any of that. All we have to do is look and see, this moment, it just changed. It was here a moment ago, wasn't it? And now it's not. And that's the truth of our existence. Everything is coming and going all the time. You know, I used to live in a farmhouse in the countryside, and there were these, it was a 120-year-old farmhouse. And the windows in the farmhouse, if you looked at them really carefully, they were thicker at the bottom than they were at the top. Because the glass, although it seemed solid, was actually a moving thing. Glass is liquid, you know, it's always moving. And so it settles down to the bottom of the window. We're a bit like that. You know, we're a moving thing that looks kind of solid, actually. But we're not nearly so fixed as we imagine ourselves to be. So suppose we embraced that, suppose not just believed it, but actually looked at it and knew it intimately, and really, you know, embodied it. Well, then I think we would maybe not be so afraid of change. And maybe our fear of death, which is a pretty big change, would just seem like yet another part of that continuous flow of impermanence. Yeah. I think that's one of the things we could do. If you want to find out about me, you can go to 5invitations.com, and there's a series of events, and you can find out where else I'm teaching and stuff. You can also obviously find the book there. And then I run an organization called the Metta Institute, M-E-T-T-A, and there also you can find out about the programs and things that we're doing. And so come play with us, you know. This is too big a question to be left until the final days of your life. Let's explore it now. So thank you very much. Thank you for everybody for inviting me. Thank you for those folks that are here in the room and those that have been watching the stream. Thank you, Karen, for your kind introduction, and Devan and the whole crew for everything you did to make it possible for me to be here saying thank you very much. And Ben, thank you very much. Yeah. Okay, let's stop there.